The last week, we've been discussing how video games, especially 3D multiplayer games, are set up in the same way as modern architecture. And the reason why is they have the same purpose and same goals, so they end up looking the same. And that doesn't sound that big. I mean, why wouldn't a shopping mall be perfectly designed for a Mario Kart 64 game? Or why wouldn't you see, you know, a grand castle built being designed just like a grand castle? And that's a good set of questions. And this is going to answer that question. And before you go on, I'm going to point out that after this point, we do have to get into a very serious subject, and it's not going to be fun. And if you need to kind of just take a moment, please do. This isn't a fun subject. So, as I've mentioned earlier, architecture is a major thing now. They now have architects who hire out or who use game engines to show off their ideas for the way a building should look like, both the interior and the exterior. And the best part about these engines is you can just walk around them and you can get angles and all this stuff without having to spend a lot of money. It's a great thing. And Unreal, the engine you're looking at right now is called Unreal, is the major one that architects are looking at. It's really expanded the idea of doing this, and they work really hard on lighting and stuff. You're not going to have any characters show up because they would take up too much computing cycles. Everything here is for you to move around and for it to look pretty. But that's still really cool. And they specifically sell Unreal Engine versions to architects so that they can make this. So it is very much so an open secret, not a joke. But if you were to ask a level designer if it's like architecture today, he would say no. The reason why, the last video we've been looking at, you've seen that up in the 90s when they first started to design levels, they didn't really have a lot of terms. They didn't have a lot of ideas. They knew there was similarities, and there's been comments on it, but everybody who comments on it kind of goes in, says something, and then walks out. They go in, they say something, and then they walk out. They're very careful. It wasn't on most of the books that do mention, just look at your surroundings, look at architecture around you, was before 98. And there's a specific reason why, and we're going to go into it. And the reason why level editing and architecture are so similar is, for the most part, if you're designing a level, even in the days of Doom, it was overhead, just like CAD. And so you could just design it really fast, just like this. You'll notice the circle system is all set up already here, and they've got, entrances and all this stuff. And this would look like a perfectly good level, except it's not a level. If you look to your left, you'll see that it's talking about people and times and how people are doing in this room. And you're like, well, I don't get it. What is this place? Allow me to give you a different angle. This is the lunchroom at the Columbine High School. And this was the first major shooting, the one that really started the entire idea. There have been tons of shootings beforehand, but this was the first time that somebody, meticulously planned it out to do it on his school. And it wasn't just one person, it was two people, and they took arms, they did all the things that they could, and it's kind of insane. It's not a subject that is easy to talk about. In fact, I'll be honest with you. When I first looked at this outline, I thought it was for the level on the left, because the guy who wrote the notes for shooting up his school also outlined actual video game levels. He was a video game level designer. The other guy who shot up the school play tested it for them. They loved talking about video games, and they loved doing things within their notes. And so they had a little clan group. A clan is just a group that got together to make levels, and they would tell everybody, "Oh yeah, we're working on this. We're working on this." And it turns out they were talking about making pipe bombs. And I want to point out that I was totally a level designer as a kid during this time. And it's kind of mind-blowing that somebody just like me could have been like that. And it's kind of scary. And yes, the level you see right there is made by one of the Columbine shooters. From what I've read, it's not the most original levels. They're fairly generic. They're not bad. People want desperately to say that they were bad, but they weren't bad. They were just, mid-level. That nothing interesting about them. They were perfectly ordinary guys, and that's where it gets, that's where it gets just insane, because they had used Doom as a means to plan out a horrific act. And if you say that out loud, you go, okay, yeah, I'd start questioning Doom. I would ask what's going on, especially when Doom has been known as this big violent game and, all these problems. And if you were to look at it from an outsider's point of view, if you were to be out on the outer rim of this circle, you would say, okay, what's going on? Why is this happening? And you would start zeroing in on the things that those guys liked. And you would start asking questions about that. And you can imagine being a parent, talking about this, because you think you have in your mind's eye what these kids were like. And the truth is, they were perfectly normal. And I mean normal. They had friends. They were bullied, and they bullied back, and they bullied others. They liked the music of the time. Yeah, they did some crazy things, but we can't say that anybody else didn't do that. Or, we can't say that there weren't people doing the exact same thing and not shooting up schools. And that's what really gets to people, because they try to look for something that would make them stand out. And it doesn't exist. And so everybody just makes up all of these stories like, oh, they were loners, they were bullies, and no, they weren't. I mean, yeah, they definitely had black trench coats and stuff, but so did everybody else during that time. It was kind of a goth era. And, then people go, well, it was because they were bullied. And you have to be like, no, they were ordinary. And, you try to say that, well, they were weird. There was something wrong with them. And the answer is nobody noticed. And the truth is the same can be said for a lot of the shooters, even into our modern age, where, yeah, there were people were like, yeah, that guy's got a problem, but if we compare him to all the other people who have this problem, it's not going to phase. And accepting that normal kids did evil is so difficult that people start to make things up, and they don't know how to respond. This is such an insane subject that they start to look, and they look for anything to understand the pattern here. And it didn't help that this was an era of kind of violence and darkness in a lot of the entertainment things for geeks and for kids during the time. And to be honest with you, the industries we're talking about were kind of stupid. This is an ad by Midway for the game Mortal Kombat. And you'll notice the kids in the picture are at best 10 years old. Maybe 13. I'll give them the benefit of a doubt. I'll say 13. But they're not much older. And you have to kind of sit there and go, wait, this is a pretty violent game. Why are they promoting it to a 10-year-old? And they made no qualms about it. The Sega CD game had, preteen and early teen kids running around and screaming Mortal Kombat. And this was a major game during that era. We cannot somehow look away from it. We have to admit it existed. And the same thing with comics. A lot of comics had gotten dark and kind of edgy, and they were trying to sell more comics than they really needed. And the truth is, there was this comics thing going on where people were buying more comics than they really needed, expecting the comics to sell for a lot later on. And it wasn't going to work out that way. And so the comics industry was selling more than people were actually reading. And that's that's gonna kind of hit you a bit. Mortal Kombat was one of the most popular arcade games of all time. It made many people have looked into it. It's the one that made the most money of all arcade games into the 90s. And you have to kind of just be like, yeah, it's a real thing. And yeah, I totally remember seeing it in arcades and going, "Whoa, that looks really realistic." And Spawn was literally a story about a hellspawn who fought against demons. And he had this violent temper and he would like lash out and destroy things. And to be honest, I don't know if the comic writers got it or understood what was going on. But this is what parents were seeing. And I mean, if you were to be, the confused parents, if you were to look in and just be like, what are these people in the center doing? And you're way out there, you would be confused and you would be scared. You would be like, all they're doing is looking at, these are normal kids, but, look at everything that's being sold to them. Something is wrong. We have to do something. And this had been a question a lot. There had been congressional hearings already. There had been senatorial hearings already. And, lots of people going, what's going on? So I have to point out, though, that, and then the piece de la resistance was if, these guys who shot up Columbine were level editors and you would look through the notes and sometimes you honestly didn't know if you were looking at notes for, school shootings or notes for a level, you'd have to ask, what if there's a level that they made that's based on their school? I mean, these guys literally said this was going to be like Doom. So how do you respond to that? And was there a level? And the answer is sort of. There was somebody made a Duke Nukem 3D level based on their school. And it wasn't oh wow, Sharon. Bad timing. Go away. But it wasn't made by the school shooters. It was not meant to do anything, but this became the big rumor amongst parents and, kids who weren't really into that scene, that there was a level based on their school. And you had to be worried because, what if there's a level about your school? And that means the kids, those kids who are kind of weird, they might be planning to shoot up the school. Let's do something about this. And, just this level of paranoia that you would have after having all these things happen over and over again, and you'd be like, well, it's gotta be something that we can explain. And the problem is, confused parents were looking at games that they knew, Mario 64 and all these games, and going like, well, this is perfectly benign. This game can't be evil. Mario cannot be evil. I remember playing Mario as a kid. There is no way Mario is evil. What are video game creators doing now with Mario? And, they started to make a lot of questions. And to be honest with you, we didn't have a lot of answers because we were just getting into level editing. So we didn't have a lot of answers. We weren't smart enough to be like, you're right, they were level editors. But look at all the other level editors who haven't done it. Something was wrong. It wasn't us. And just straight up say, you're right. It does look pretty bad. There's no denying it. And then show that, yeah, there is some scariness to this issue. A school is the same as a deathmatch level. It would be a perfectly wonderful deathmatch level. And having to say that out loud would have caused all of this furor. So suddenly everybody who made games was just like, I don't know how to respond. I'm too new at this to really have a good response. And this created a problem because, the parents, what they saw was Mario, and then they see the violent the video game with a bunch of violence in it, and they're just like, what is going on? Asking questions that people who are just barely getting into it can't don't have any answers to, because for the most part they're in their teens and they're in their 20s and they're just like, yeah, this is cool, yeah, 9 Inch Nails, man, yeah, just being stupid. And that is difficult to explain to somebody who's that concerned, or difficult to explain why you did things in your 20s and your teens anyway. So there were three responses. One was over the top, one was benign, and one was denial. Over the top, this is a level from the mid 2000s called Modern Warfare 2, and this is exactly what it looks like. Somebody walks into an airport and you shoot at everybody you want to. And I've been told that you don't actually have to shoot anybody, but you can just run forward, not shoot anybody, and get to the end of the level, and you'll be fine. And there were a lot of people who tried different ways to get out of the fact that this was a actual level, and people were trying to make it look dramatic and all this stuff. The same stupidity, if you will. And I'm not going to claim to be a Modern Warfare fan. I thought it was really stupid. So to me, this is a really dumb response, but it'll show you the example that these people decided that best response is to be over the top. And, there is a certain history, a certain reality to this, where, great comedians have taken very tough subjects and kind of been over the top and comical about it. Mel Brooks makes fun of the Holocaust all the time. He makes fun of Hitler. And he makes fun of, the way people were scared of Hitler and the way his people were tortured in various times. And then he makes fun of his own people during that time. And he's like, the best way to make Hitler no longer scary is for us to laugh our heads off at him. And, these over-the-top people said, the best way to deal with this is to have it happen in a game and make sure it's a major part of the story. Speaking of which, you can actually skip this level, so that's their exact level of trust for that level. The next way they could do it is to have a benign response. This tended to be a Japanese response where, you had a high school, but, so what? They don't have shooting, so, it's just the place where you go. It's teenagers. Of course they go to a high school. Are there demons here? Yeah, but there's demons everywhere. It's just a benign place. It's just a place that you would think of when you're in high school. And that showed up in a lot of games where, you walked in and they didn't reference any of the evil stuff. They just went, nah, it's just a high school. They kind of didn't even talk about it. It was just purely a place and, talking about life. And then finally, there was denial. And this is where most people just couldn't respond. They couldn't say that, yes, a mall would make a great deathmatch level, and yes, a school would make a great deathmatch level. And I can't, I can't say that what they said is wrong. If you don't have a good answer, the best response is to deny it. Just be like, that isn't possible, so therefore it's not true. And because of this, a lot of level editors, they just won't admit to it. They'll just be like, oh yeah, the school would be, yeah. And so, there's very specific rules on what to do and how to do it. And if you want to think about it a little bit differently, had Columbine not happened, had these two shooters not have done what they were doing, they could have worked in the industry. They could have, worked their way up and become level editors today. And people would be asking them questions like, well, where did you get your ideas? How did you do this? Did you ever have any problems as a kid? Violent video games were a major thing. And they'd be like, oh man, when we were kids, we once had this stupid idea about shooting up the school, but oh man, that was stupid. We were so, we were so dumb as kids. But yeah, as soon as we realized, what we were doing, we were like, oh no, whoa, this is stupid. We're not going to do this anymore. But the truth is they did do it, and they're now dead and they're gone. And we have to kind of ask the questions that we don't want to ask. And that's the reason why, for the most part, companies will not admit that a school or a mall or a place like that would be a perfect video game level. Because if they admit it, they have to, or not just video game level, a good deathmatch or a good multiplayer level. And if they do, they have to admit that there is a point, and it's not an easy point to talk about because there's no happy answer there. The reality is there should be a separation. You know, my school would make a great deathmatch level, but I'm not about to go shoot it up unless it's laser tag or something. In fact, had the two idiots from the Columbine just thought about it a little bit more and had a paintball war in their school or something a little more benign, they would have, all those possibilities. You're just like, why didn't you think of something else? What kind of moron does this? And, there isn't a happy answer. They chose what they chose and they did what they did. And in the end, to this day, talking about, schools or architecture, leaves a lot of stuff unsaid because the companies can't deal with all that political stuff that will happen if they admit that, yes, a school would make a wonderful deathmatch level. The Palazzo around Italy would make a great deathmatch level. If you admit it, and you admit that modern architecture and schools and malls and video game levels all have the same purpose, we end up having to admit that the Columbine shooters had a point, and they took it in a way that nobody wants to be done. And I guess I'm rambling here because I don't have a good conclusion, because that's the scariness part. Normal kids did something evil, and they looked at something and went, yeah, this is how it should happen. And now we're all left with, the remains, trying to go, okay, how do we respond to this insanity? And for the most part, we don't. All right. Next week, we are going to be talking about the changes from the culture that we know from the, even 5 years ago, how it was set up, to what it's transitioning over to, and how it's affecting places where geeks meet, and how the culture is having to adapt to everything. And we'll talk about that more next week, and I look forward to seeing you something way happier than this. So catch y'all later.